Hello sa lahat. Ngayon ay yung fourth na meeting natin sa RCXRF na book club, which is about sa book ni William Lane Craig ng title ay On Guard. Ngayon, we will talk about yung fourth chapter ng title ay Why Did the Universe Begin? Ang magiging format natin sa ating book club is that as the host, I will be leading the flow ng discussion. What I will do is to discuss or mention certain points na na-discuss ni Dr. Craig sa chapter. And as we go along, I'll start to ask specific questions about the book for open discussion. Ang intention here is to make sure na we understand the book, that we are also able to process ang information provided. Dahil this is merely a recap video, I will not include here ang kanilang answers, but just give my personal answers sa mga questions na yun when it was asked. So let's start sa ating discussion about sa first chapter ng book. Dr. Craig started talking about his childhood. He wondered about how the universe began. Ang iniisip niya is that how one event is preceded by another event, back and back into the past, without it having a starting point. And sa mind niya ay inconceivable to think of a universe na walang starting point. And for centuries to millennia, men had grappled with the notion of an infinite past and about the question kung meron bang absolute beginning. Ang paniniwala raw ng ancient Greek philosophers is that ang matter ay necessary at uncreated, at dahil dito ay they regarded it as eternal. Though si God may be responsible for introducing order sa cosmos, pero hindi siya ang nag-create ng universe. Ang Greek view na ito ay iba sa Jewish na notions, dahil they believe ng universe ay hindi always na nag-exist, but that it is something na created ni God at some point in the past. Dr. Craig cited ang Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Eventually raw, ay nag-interact ang dalawang traditions at nagkaroon ng debate sa Western philosophy about whether or not may beginning ang universe. Ang debate ay nag-play among the Jews, Muslims, and Christians, both Catholic and Protestant, and nag-lead siya sa isang inconclusive na end noong 18th century when Immanuel Kant held na may rational arguments for both sides, which exposed na bankrupt ang reason mismo. Dr. Craig then introduced ang mismong argument na nag-cause ng controversy, and one of its greatest champions ay si Al-Ghazali, isang 12th century na Muslim theologian from Persia or modern-day Iran. Concerned siya in his time ng mga Muslim philosophers of his day ay influence ng ancient Greek philosophy para i-deny nila that God created the universe. Ang view nila nun is that ang universe ay necessarily nag-flow out kay God and dahil dun ay wala itong beginning. After aralin ni Al-Ghazali ang teachings ng mga philosophers na ito, ay sinulat niya ang The Incoherence of the Philosophers to criticize ang kanilang views. Ang argument ni Al-Ghazali is that ang universe ay may beginning, and dahil walang nag-begin to exist ng walang cause, then dapat mayroong transcendent na creator ng universe. Ang summary ng reasoning niya, as stated by Dr. Craig sa isang syllogism, ay Premise 1, whatever begins to exist has a cause. Premise 2, the universe began to exist. Conclusion, therefore, the universe has a cause. Recently, we know this argument as the Kalam Cosmological Argument. And we will now begin to discuss ang defense ng first premise, which is whatever begins to exist has a cause. In defense ng first premise, Dr. Craig mentioned na virtually undeniable ito for any truth seeker dahil if ang isang bagay ay mag-come into being ng walang cause would be the same as to come into being from nothing. And ito raw ay impossible. Now, Dr. Craig gave 3 reasons to support premise 1, which are 1, something cannot come from nothing. 2, if something can come into being from nothing, then it becomes inexplicable why just anything or everything doesn't come into being from nothing. Number 3, common experience and scientific evidence confirm the truth of premise 1. Now, ano ba ang sinabi niya about each point? So something cannot come from nothing. Dr. Craig said na pag nag-claim tayo that something can come into being from nothing, then it is worse than magic. Kasi sa magic, we see a magician pulling a rabbit out of a hat. So dito at least meron tayong magician and the hat to explain what is happening. Pero if we deny premise 1, then we should think na ang whole universe ay nag-appear at some point in the past ng walang reason. Pero wala naman kasing tao ang naniniwala na ang isang kabayo or Eskimo village would pop into being without a cause. Ang possible na response rito ng ibang skeptics is that ang subatomic particles of physics ay nag-come into being from nothing. And makikita raw na ang certain series sa origin ng universe ay described as getting something from nothing. Pero ito ay abuse ng science dahil ang series in question ay nag-talk about particles na nag-originate as fluctuation ng energy na vacuum. So ang vacuum sa physics is not the same way as we understand vacuum, which is nothing. But rather, the vacuum is a sea of fluctuating na energy na governed by physical laws na may physical structure. And hence, hindi siya talaga nothing. Sa number 2 naman, if something can come into being from nothing, then it becomes inexplicable why just anything or everything doesn't come into being from nothing. Maganda ang question na binitawan ni Dr. Craig. Ang sabi niya, bakit daw hindi nag-pop into being from nothing si Beethoven or ang root beer? Bakit daw na only universes ang nag-come into being from nothing? Bakit ba discriminatory ang nothingness na nag-favor ito ng universes? Ang nothingness ay wala raw properties and walang bagay na pwede pigilan ang nothingness. Kasi if nothingness is nothing, then walang object na pwede natin pigilan. Ang response raw dito ng atheists is that ang premise 1 ay true for everything in the universe, but not of the universe itself. Ang sagot natin dito ay similar sa taxi cab fallacy sa last na meeting natin. Hindi nila pwede dismiss ang law of causality like a cab once as a universe na tayo. Ang premise 1 kasi ay hindi lamang law of nature like sa gravity, rather ay isa itong metaphysical na principle na nag-govern sa all reality. Another objection is that if lahat ay may cause, then ano ang cause ni God? But this does not understand the argument in question kasi hindi naman sinasabi ng premise 1 na lahat ng bagay ay may cause, but that lahat ng nagbegin to exist ay may cause. For this reason, ay hindi nag-apply kay God ang premise 1 dahil eternal siya and uncaused. Dahil dito ay walang special pleading na naganap kasi wala namang exception sa standard na ginawa kasi nag-apply lang talaga ang premise 1 sa lahat ng mga bagay na nagbegin to exist. So number 3, common experience and scientific evidence confirm the truth of premise 1. Dito naman ay constantly verify daw ang premise 1 and not falsified. And dahil dito ay mahirap isipin, how could anyone deny premise 1 dahil sa modern science? Now that we are able to discuss ang defense sa first premise, let us answer 2 questions before we proceed sa defense ng second premise. Question: why do you suppose that so many smart people think it makes sense that the universe may have popped into being from nothing without a cause? Answer: ang suspicion ko is more on sa testimony ng scripture na dahil sa sinful nature natin, ang predisposition talaga natin is to do everything just to avoid ang conclusion na si God ay nag-exist. Ang sabi sa Romans 1:18-25, quote, "The wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness of people who suppress the truth by their wickedness, since what may be known about God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. For although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him, but their thinking became futile, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools, and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like a mortal human being, and birds and animals and reptiles. Therefore, God gave them over in the sinful desires of their hearts to sexual impurity for the degrading of their bodies with one another. They exchanged the truth about God for a lie, and worshipped and served created things rather than the Creator, who is forever praised." Amen. End quote. With this in mind, it makes sense why even smart people would accept arguments na clearly illogical, such as yung universe will create itself from non-being, which presupposes ng universe ay nag-exist muna before it created itself. Or ang iba naman would equivocate in a sense ng sa universe created itself from nothing ay something pala. Dahil isa pala itong vacuum na may sea of fluctuating na energy. They will justify na okay ang explanation nila kasi they assume na from the get-go na si God ay hindi nag-exist. And that ang pwede lang na cause ng material reality ay something na material din. I think ang ganitong procedure ay hindi reasonable kasi you already rule out in advance ang other kinds of explanations that may be contrary sa iyong metaphysical assumptions. Question: what would you say to someone who says that nothing ever begins to exist since everything is made of prior material constituents? Answer: this reminds me of a discussion between cosmic skeptic and William Lane Craig. Basically, ang view ni cosmic skeptic is that he denies na everything that begins to exist has a cause. Hindi kasi nagbegin to exist ang mga bagay-bagay dahil sila ay merely rearrangement of fundamental particles. Kung baga, ang mga bagay na tinatawag natin na tao, pusa, buildings, etc. ay merely a rearrangement of matter. Dr. Craig labels this as a mereological nihilism. And indeed, this is a radical view which we could not accept. Ito ay dahil ang mga bagay tulad ng mga tao, pusa, and buildings ay mga bagay na totoong nag-exist. In fact, when we think about human beings, we know na qualitatively different tayo compared sa isang corpse. Hindi tayo merely rearrangement ng matter kasi we know na buhay tayo, we exist, we can also think, feel, and make decisions. Hindi tayo maka-create ng tao just by merely doing the same arrangement ng matter. So if ang isang skeptic would pick this view just for them to deny premise 1, in a sense ay good thing siya kasi forced sila to believe in bizarre views just for them to be able to deny ang ating argument. Now, let's proceed sa mas controversial na premise, which is ang premise 2, which states the universe began to exist. Dito naman, to support premise 2, we will discuss 2 philosophical arguments and 2 scientific arguments. We'll start muna sa philosophical arguments. First philosophical argument, ito ang an actually infinite number of things cannot exist. Dito ay si Al-Ghazali ay nag-argue na if ang universe ay never nagbegin to exist, then there have been an infinite number of past events prior to today. Pero ang infinite number of things ay hindi pwede mag-exist. Though this should be nuanced daw kasi si Al-Ghazali naman believes that a potentially infinite number of things could exist. Pero an actually infinite number of things could not exist. Now this begs the question, ano bang difference between potential and actual infinity? Answer: ayon kay Dr. Craig, when something is potentially infinite, ang infinity daw ay nagserve merely bilang ideal na limit that we could never reach. Ang example ni Dr. Craig is that if we divide any finite na distance in half, and then into fourths, then into eighths, then into sixteenths, and so on into infinity, then ang number of divisions na magagawa natin ay potentially infinite. In a sense na we could go on dividing endlessly, pero never tayo makakarating sa infinitieth na division. Kasi never tayo magkakaroon ng actually infinite number of parts or division. Now, si Ghazali ay walang problem sa existence ng potential infinites kasi ideal na limits lang naman ito. Pero if we talk about actual infinites, we are not talking about things na nag-grow toward infinity, but of a collection na already complete. Ang number of members sa collection ay more than any finite number. Ang argument ni Al-Ghazali is that if may actually infinite na number of things na nag-exist, then ang absurdities would result. And to avoid this, we must deny the existence of actual infinities. Ang ibig sabihin nito is that ang number of past events ay hindi pwede maging actually infinite. Dahil dito, ang universe ay hindi pwede maging beginningless, pero dapat ito ay nagbegin to exist. An objection sa distinction between potential and actual infinity ay from modern mathematics. Ang nag-develop ng modern theory ng infinite sets ay si Georg Cantor. Common sa modern na set theory na may actually infinite na mga sets. One example, yung set ng natural numbers. Kasi meron tayong makikita ang actually infinite na number of members in it. Ang members daw ng set ay hindi merely potentially infinite, pero actual infinite sila. And they believe na though mistaken sila na this undermines Al-Ghazali's argument. Now, how do we answer this kind of objection? Answer. We can say na ang developments na ito sa modern mathematics merely show na we can adopt certain axioms and rules and talk about actually infinite na collections in a consistent way without contradicting ourselves. So this helps us talk about actual infinites in discourse. Pero hindi nito pinapakita na nag-exist yung mathematical entities na ito in a concrete sense. If tama si Al-Ghazali, then ang actual infinite na ito sa discourse ay merely nasa fictional realm or in the mind. This shows ng existence na actual infinites na ito sa modern na set theory ay hindi nag-undermine ng argument ni Al-Ghazali. We can actually further strengthen it pa nga by showing ang strange nature ng actual infinity if we talk about it in reality. Now, how can we demonstrate the strange nature of the actual infinity? Answer. We can demonstrate it gamit ang Hilbert's Hotel. Ang illustration na Hilbert's Hotel ay brainchild ng great German mathematician na si David Hilbert. Imagine, first an ordinary hotel na may finite na number of rooms. If puno na lahat ng rooms, then if we show up sa desk and ask if may available ba na rooms, then ang sasabihin sa atin ng hotel manager is, sorry, lahat ng rooms ay occupied na. Now, let's imagine a hotel na may infinite number of rooms. And let's suppose na lahat ng rooms ay full. So, walang vacancy dito sa infinite na hotel. Pero let's suppose na may bagong guest na pumunta sa front desk and nag-ask siya for a room. Ang sabi ng hotel manager ay, no problem. He moves yung person na nagstay sa room 1 to room 2 and ang person na nagstay sa room 2 to room 3 and so on. Basically, ay ang nagstay sa room N ay mag-move sa room na n plus 1 and so on to infinity. Dahil dito ay ang room 1 ay naging vacant and a new guest was able to check in. Pero bago siya nag-arrive ay lahat ng rooms ay full. Now, this gets worse. Imagine if an infinite new guest shows up sa front desk and asks if may available ba na rooms. Ang hotel manager will say, no problem. Then he will move the person from room 1 to room 2, then ang person sa room 2 to room 4, then ang person from room 3 to room 6, and so on. So ang person from room 2 will be moved sa room 2n, and so on into infinity. Ang mangyari dito ay lahat ng odd-numbered rooms will become vacant para easily ma-accommodate ang infinity ng new guests. The hotel manager could do this an infinite number of times and lagi siya makakapag-accommodate ng new guests. And yet before, ang infinite number of guests ay nag-arrive ay full na lahat ng rooms. Pero ang Hilbert's Hotel ay stranger pa now than what the German mathematician made it out to be. Let's imagine kung ano mangyari if some of the guests ay mag-start to check out. Let's suppose na lahat ng guests sa odd-numbered na rooms ay mag-check out. Sa case na ito ay an infinite number of people ay umalis sa hotel. And yet, there are no fewer people sa hotel kasi may infinite number of people na nag-remain. And if we suppose na ayaw ng hotel manager ng half-empty na hotel, and gagawin lang siya, ang gagawin lang niya is to move the guests in reverse order, then ang half-empty na hotel niya would become overflowing na with guests. Now, using na ang strange na hotel could always be made to be fully occupied ng hotel manager, pero we can be wrong. Suppose ang guests sa room 4, 5, 6, and so on would check out. At a single stroke ay ang hotel would virtually be emptied and ang matitira lang ay ang guests sa room 1 to 3. And ang infinite ay magiging finite. And it could be true then to say na if all the guests sa odd-numbered na rooms ay nag-check out, ay same number of people ito sa nag-check out from room 4, 5, 6, and so on to infinity. Now, can such a hotel exist in reality? We see na this hotel is absurd. And this illustration shows na an actually infinite number of things are absurd. Now, ano ba yung possible response sa Hilbert's Hotel? Answer. Minsan ay nag-react ang mga tao by saying na ang absurdities ay nag-result dahil ang concept ng infinity is beyond us and that we cannot understand it. Pero mistaken ang reaction na ito at naive. Based sa discussion kanina, ang infinite set theory ay highly developed at well understood siya na branch of modern mathematics. Ang absurdities ay nag-result dahil we do understand ang nature ng isang actual infinite. Super talino ni Hilbert and alam niya how to illustrate ang bizarre na consequences ng actual infinity if they exist in reality. Ang best na magawa ng critic ngayon is to bite the bullet and say na if ang actual infinity ay nag-exist, then ang absurdities na nakita natin sa Hilbert's Hotel would be the exact things that we should expect. Pero ang justification na ito ay hindi adequate. Si Hilbert would agree na if an actually infinite thing could exist, then ang mangyari sa illustration is that what we could expect. Pero ang question is whether such a hotel is really possible in reality. Ang critics cannot just bite the bullet and say na this is exactly what we could expect. We need to think about ang problem nito by having logical contradictions. Kasi though we subtract two identical na quantities such as infinity, it leads to non-identical na results. This is the reason bakit bawal to subtract infinity to infinity sa math. This is the reason why for Dr. Craig ay maganda ang first na argument ni Al-Ghazali dahil it shows na ang past na events must be finite. And dahil dito, ang universe ay dapat may beginning. Before we proceed sa second na philosophical argument, let's answer two questions na raised ni Dr. Craig in light of the first philosophical argument. Question. Nothing in our universe can be actually infinite. But what about God, who is beyond our universe? In what sense is God infinite? Why does this matter? Ang question na ito ay nagmatter kasi if we say na walang actual infinite and God is infinite, then dapat si God ay hindi rin nag-exist. But when we talk about actual infinity sa context ng universe, we are talking about it in a quantitative sense, in the same way na we measure physical objects. But we are not talking about it in a qualitative sense, which is the same sense na we use when we talk about God's attributes. With this in mind, it's clear na walang contradiction for saying na walang actual infinity and that God exists. Question. Al-Ghazali shows that an infinite number of past events is impossible. What about the future? Is it actually or merely potentially infinite? How is eternity different from an infinite number of moments in time? Ang future ay isang potential infinite kasi ang infinity na ito, as Dr. Craig explained, ay isang ideal limit na never natin ma-reach. Ang eternity ay different din sa infinite number of moments in time. I remember a discussion with Dr. Craig about the nature of time. Basically, ay mahirap daw magbigay ng analysis of time na hindi mag-end up in a circular way. Kasi if we define time as duration, the meaning ng duration is an interval of time, then hindi rin talaga naging helpful ito sa pag-define about what time is. Ang good na definition na nakuha ko from him though is that ang time ay ordered by relations of earlier than and later than. And so if essential ito sa time, then I think sa eternity ay walang order ng relations ng earlier than and later than. This is hard to think about bilang isang creature in time. And we know na dahil we are in time, we don't experience reality all at once. May sequence siya. At least for now, I guess yun ang helpful na distinction para i-differentiate ang time and eternity. Now, let's proceed to second philosophical argument, which is you can pass through an infinite number of elements one at a time. Dito, imagine a series of past events. Para kay Al-Ghazali ay ang series ay formed by adding one event after another. Dito, we can think of a series of dominoes na nag-fall after another until the last domino. Ang last domino is ang present or today. Pero ang argument niya is that walang series na formed by adding one member after another ay actually infinite. Dahil you cannot pass through an infinite number of elements one at a time. Ito ay dahil if you try to count into infinity, there's always an infinity of numbers na left to count. So sa dominoes, ang final na domino could never fall in an infinite number of dominoes if an infinite number of dominoes had to fall first. But obviously, we are here in the present, and for this reason, ay finite lamang ang series of past events in that we have a beginning. Now, dito sa second philosophical argument, ang objection ng ilang critics daw is that kahit sa beginningless na past, ay every event sa past ay only a finite na distance from the present. So if you think of negative numbers, negative 3, 2, negative 1, then 0, so beginningless daw siya. Pero if you pick any number, say negative 11 or negative 1 million or whatever, ay finite ang distance nito from zero, and ang finite na distance from any past event to the present ay easily crossed, just as you can count down to zero from any negative number na piliin mo. Now, how would we answer this objection? Answer. Ang objection na ito ay nag-commit ng logical fallacy called as fallacy of composition. Ang fallacy na ito confuses ang property ng part as the property of the whole. For example, every part ng elephant could be said to be light in weight if taken in isolation, but it doesn't mean na if taken as a whole ay magaan na ang weight nito. Sa case natin at hand, it does not mean na porket finite ang part ng series and that it could be crossed or counted down, ay it means na ang whole infinite na series could be crossed and counted na. Ang question is not how any finite part of the past can be formed by adding one event after another, pero how the whole beginningless past could be completed by adding one event after another. For scientific argument. I think this will suffice not to argue for the second philosophical argument. Let us now proceed sa scientific arguments for premise 2. Let's start sa first scientific argument, which is the expansion of the universe. Question. How did Dr. Craig argue for the expansion of the universe? Answer. The Big Bang. Dito ay Dr. Craig talked about the Big Bang. Historically, ay men daw usually assumed na ang universe as a whole ay unchanging. Though ang things in the universe ay nag-change, they see the universe itself ay always there. Ito rin ang assumption ni Albert Einstein when he began to apply his new theory of gravity, which is called the general theory of relativity, noong 1917. Though si Einstein felt na parang may mali, ang equations niya kasi ay nag-describe ng universe na either nag-blow up na parang balloon or one na nag-collapse upon itself. Though puzzled si Einstein, he tried to solve it by fudging his equations. And dahil dito, he was able to make the universe walk the tightrope between exploding and imploding. Noong 1920s, ay ang Russian mathematician na si Alexander Friedman at ang Belgian na astronomer na si George Lemaitre ay nag-decide to take Einstein's equations at face value. And as a result, they came up independently with models of an expanding universe. Tapos noong 1929, ang American na astronomer na si Edwin Hubble observed sa Mount Wilson Observatory ng lights from distant galaxies appear to be rather than expected. This confirmed ang theory ni Friedman and Lemaitre. Ang redshift na ito ng light ay plausibly seen as a result ng pag-stretch ng light waves as the galaxies move farther away from us. Kahit saan daw ilagay ni Hubble ang telescope niya, ay he observes the same redshift sa ibang mga galaxies. Para raw tayong nasa center ng isang cosmic na explosion at ang ibang mga galaxies ay nag-fly away from us at fantastic speeds. Ang pag-expand ng universe na ito ay you can imagine ang balloon at lagyan mo siya ng tuldok na galing sa permanent marker. Pag ihipan mo ang balloon, you will see na lumalayo ang mga tuldok from each other, though sila ay nagstay sa same place. Parang ganun daw yung expansion ng universe kasi imbes na lumalayo ang galaxies from each other, ay we see ang space raw mismo ang nag-expand. Next, yung beginning ng time. If we trace natin ang expansion ng universe back in time, makita natin na everything gets closer together. Kung pwede raw mag-shrink ang balloon further na wala itong minimum size, then mag-shrink daw ito to zero. Dito makita natin na we can represent space-time geometrically as a cone, and makita natin sa dulo nito na may boundary point siya, kung saan ang matter and energy, aside from space-time, ay nag-begin to exist. Ito raw ang beginning ng universe. Prior sa boundary na ito ay wala raw anything na nag-exist. Ito yung tinatawag na standard na Big Bang model. Now, is this model correct? Aside from the redshift na na-discover sa light from distant galaxies, another evidence na we can talk about ay ang abundance raw ng certain light elements tulad ng helium ay best explained na form siya ng hot and dense na Big Bang. Another is ang discovery noong 1965 na cosmic background radiation ay best explained na trace siya ng Big Bang. Noong 1948 ay predicted na if totoong may Big Bang ay they will be able to discover ang afterglow nito, which are light and heat from the initial explosion. Ang light daw nito ay hindi na visible dahil sobrang stretch ng wavelength nito ng expanding universe na slightly shorter ng wavelengths nito sa kaya gawin ng microwave oven, though ang heat ay nadedetect pa rin. Ito ay na-discover nila Arno Penzias at Robert Wilson sa antenna nila sa Bell Labs. Kahit saan nila itapat ang antenna nila, ay ang mysterious na radiation ay andun pa rin. Akala nila na baka nalagyan lang ng tae ng ibon yung antenna, pero kahit nung lininisan nila ito ay na-detect pa rin nila yung radiation coming from all directions. Ngayon natapos na tayong talking about yung first scientific argument, let us now proceed to the second scientific argument, which is the thermodynamics of the universe. Now, how do we explain ano ba yung second law of thermodynamics? Answer. Ang science ng thermodynamics ay rooted sa work ng German physicist na si Rudolf Clausius, and sa kanya credited yung second law of thermodynamics. Ang second law of thermodynamics ay sinasabi na kung walang energy na feed sa system, then ang system will increase sa disorder. Ang easy way for us to understand this is if you use a flashlight na may battery. Dadating ang time na maubusan ito ng battery and hindi na siya iilaw. So pag nag-increase ang entropy hanggang sa mag-reach na siya sa state ng equilibrium, which is a state ng universe na wala nang change na possible, at ang energy sa universe ay spread out evenly, ang temperature at pressure ay the same na rin everywhere. Ito yung tinatawag na heat death. Dito ay wala ng stars, galaxies, and planets. Now, there are different ways that people use to get around this. Dito I will discuss 4 of them and kung ano ba yung criticism natin sa bawat views na yun. So yung pag-uusapan natin ay yung Boltzmann's many worlds hypothesis, ang oscillating universe, bubble universes, and baby universes. Let's start sa Boltzmann's many worlds hypothesis. Dito, noong 19th century, ay si Ludwig Boltzmann ay nag-propose ng solution sa problem. Ang suggestion niya is that ang universe ay perhaps as a state na of overall equilibrium. Pero by chance ay nagkaroon ng pag-arise ng orderly pockets of this equilibrium. Ang isolated regions of this equilibrium ay tinatawag niya na worlds. At ang universe raw natin happens to be only one of those worlds. And eventually, dahil sa second law of thermodynamics ay babalik din daw ito sa state of equilibrium. Ang problem dito ay maraming physicists ang nag-reject nito. Ito ay dahil if ang world natin ay chance fluctuation lamang from an overall state of equilibrium, then ang dapat na ma-observe natin ay smaller na region of order. Ito ay dahil mas probable ang small na fluctuation compared sa huge and sustained na fluctuation like our universe. In fact, ang calculation ni Roger Penrose about the odds ng low entropy condition ng universe natin to exist ay order of 1 part in 10 raised to 10 raised to 123. If we compare siya sa probability ng solar system natin ay ma-form instantly based sa random collision ng particles, it will be 1 in 10 raised to 10 raised to 60. Based sa ganitong computation, it's obvious na we should be observing smaller worlds ensemble of worlds. Ang hypothesis ni Boltzmann ay sabi na if carried out, ay mag-lead on some sort of illusionism. In all probability kasi ay most likely na we inhabit a small region of order at ang stars and planets na we observe ay merely illusions. Ang most probable raw kasi na state na adequate to support yung ordered na observations natin is a smaller universe na binubuo lamang ng single brain na nag-appear out of the disorder via thermal fluctuation. Ang tawag dito ng ilang cosmologists ay Boltzmann brains. Ang Boltzmann brains daw ay mas marami sa ensemble of universes than ordinary observers. And dahil dito, ay dapat isipin natin na tayo ay Boltzmann brains lamang if we believe na our universe is only one member of an ensemble of worlds. Dahil ang idea na ito seems crazy, then this fact strongly disconfirms ang hypothesis na may multiverse na old and big enough na nag-evolve na may sufficient volume para mag-account for our low entropy condition na nangyari by chance. Next, ang oscillating universe. Dito naman ay noong 1960s, may mga series na nag-craft ng oscillating models ng universe. According to them, ang universe ay nag-expand and contract and nag-re-expand and recontract from eternity past. Ang problem dito ay ang thermodynamic na properties ng models na ito ay nag-imply na ng very beginning na they are trying to avoid. Ito ay dahil ang entropy ay nag-increase from cycle to cycle, which makes the cycle longer and larger than the one before. Ang ibig sabihin nito is that if we trace back ang cycles in time, ay they get smaller until we reach ang beginning ng universe. Also, ang estimate ng mga astronomers ay hindi nito kaya lumagpas ng 100 na cycles. Next, bubble universes. Dito naman ay nag-propose ang mga theorists na ang universe natin ay isang bubble lamang sa isang malaking multiverse ng bubble universes. Ang claim nila is that ang second law ay nag-apply lamang sa bubbles and hindi sa buong multiverse. Kahit totoo pa ang claim na ito ay ang Bohr-Vilenkin theorem ay nag-apply pa rin sa multiverse and it requires na may absolute beginning. Next, baby universes. Dito naman ay may conjectures na baka ang black holes ay entrance to wormholes sa space-time kung saan ang energy ay pwede mag-travel to spawn baby universes. Ang mangyari is that if ang parang umbilical cord na nag-connect sa mother at baby na universe ay nakat, ay ang baby universe becomes an independent na universe. At ang scenario raw na ito could be extended from the infinite past. Ang second law ay nag-apply pa rin dito at dahil doon ay ang second law ay hindi pa rin nag-go on from infinity. Ang scenario rin na ito ay nag-contradict ng subatomic physics kasi this requires ng information na nag-go down sa black hole ay mag-remain pa rin sa ating universe. Naging subject ito sa pusta ni John Preskill and ni Stephen Hawking kung saan nag-admit si Hawking noong 2004 na natalo siya. Dito ay nag-apologize siya sa science fiction fans by admitting na walang baby universes. Based sa discussion natin sa Boltzmann-many worlds hypothesis, oscillating universe, bubble universes, and baby universes, it seems na we are able to confirm ang truth ng second premise ng Kalam Cosmological Argument through scientific evidence ng thermodynamics. Impressive ito dahil considered ito as a completed na field of science, so highly unlikely na ma-reverse ang mga findings nito. Conclusion. Now, based sa evidence natin sa parehang premises, we can conclude ng universe ay may cause. Now, this begs the question, ano ba ang cause ng universe? What possible causes of the universe can you think of? What do you think is the best candidate for the cause of the universe and why? Answer. Ang possible causes ng universe that I have read is that ang universe created itself from nothing. Ito ay isang cosmic bootstrap na effect basically. Narinig ko ito from the philosopher na si Daniel Dennett. This is not convincing, though, kasi ang meaning natin ng nothing is non-being. And if that is the case, then it's philosophically incoherent for nothing to have the capacity to create the universe from nothing. Kasi wala siyang capacities to begin with. In order to create the universe, it presupposes ng universe ay nag-exist muna, which is contrary sa claim na from nothing na nag-emerge ang universe. Another possible cause ay ang sinabi ni Stephen Hawking na ang universe created itself from nothing because of such a law as gravity. But this commits the same mistake as Dennett. Furthermore, ang law tulad ng gravity ay hindi nothing but something. It already presupposes something na lumabas kasabay ng emergence ng time, space, and matter. So ang cause ay hindi pwede maging ang law of gravity. Another is ang abstract objects. Ang sabi ng chemist na si Peter Atkins, ang universe ay nag-exist dahil sa interaction ng mathematical points. But since abstract objects are causally iffy, it's not really clear how something abstract, kahit millions of years pa yan mag-interact, would suddenly be able to create a concrete na physical universe. Though ang abstract objects transcend ang time, space, and matter, which is a good candidate to be the cause of the universe, wala siyang power and hindi niya kaya mag-decide to create. With this in mind, ang best candidate for the existence of the universe is si God. Dahil si God ay nag-transcend sa time, space, and matter. So nag-fit siya as a candidate prior to the universe existence. And unlike abstract objects, God is omnipotent and can decide to create. Therefore, si God ang best explanation kung bakit nag-exist ang universe.